The US military says it has carried out strikes on missile launch sites and mine-laying vessels in southern Iran. US Central Command says the attacks were in self-defence and were aimed at protecting American forces during the ceasefire. Explosions were earlier reported near the port city of Bandar Abbas. An Iranian source has told Al Jazeera the incident began when the IRGC targeted a vessel at sea before US warplanes struck Iranian naval boats in the Gulf. Well, it comes as Iran's foreign minister and top negotiator held talks in Doha on Monday aimed at resolving the remaining obstacles to a possible deal. We will get the view from Tehran in just a moment, but first, here's our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, with the latest from Washington.
Well, CENTCOM, which coordinates all the US military operations in the region, in and around Iran, have put out the statement in the last couple of hours, saying that these incidents happened within the last 24 hours, essentially saying that this was to protect US forces. Now, they're not saying that US forces came under attack. What they're alleging is that the United States took action, particularly around missile sites and also boats that were possibly going to lay mines as a preventative measure to protect the troops in that region. Now, we know they've done this sort of thing before. Very early on in the ceasefire, this sort of thing happened. At that stage, the United States said it hadn't graduated to a breach of the ceasefire because there were no casualties. And yet again, in this incident, the United States says that no US service personnel were injured or were killed. So that would seem to suggest that, again, this won't reach the level of a breach of ceasefire, but it was action the United States said was to defend their forces while using restraint, particularly around Bandar Abbas. So it's not going to derail the talks underway at the moment involving several countries, but clearly it is a concerning moment for both countries, and a reminder that the US military force still hasn't gone away. To be clear, the expectation was coming from social media posts by Donald Trump, who was suggesting that a deal was very close, and with Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, in India saying that he expected good news possibly today, when he said that on Saturday, or maybe even tomorrow. Here we are on Monday, and we are told from sources in and around the White House that they're about 95% of the way there. But of course, there's a big difference between 95% and 100%. There's a lot still to be agreed, a lot of details still to be ironed out. Donald Trump has continued to talk about the things that he wants to see in the deal. Just in the last couple of hours on his Truth Social platform, he talked about how nuclear dust, essentially the enriched uranium, had to be either removed or destroyed from in Iran itself because they simply could not afford that to be given to the Iranians. So there's still a lot of ground to cover, still a lot of talks to go on. I mean, what is clear is that we're not quite on the verge of a deal. And you also have to remember that Donald Trump has several times in the past said that we're very close to a deal, we're almost over the line, and we've found out that there is an issue, or there's a voice in his ear, or there's some level of complaint. And certainly the drafts of the deal that were circulating around at the weekend came in for a lot of criticism from people who would normally be naturally aligned with Donald Trump and the MAGA movement.
Iranian media, including the state media, is widely reporting that there have been 3 explosions heard in Bandar Abbas. So not saying in Bandar Abbas, but heard from Bandar Abbas. So it could be on the sea or in Bandar Abbas. However, here they are not denying the American report so far that the Iranian missile launchers have been attacked and that the Iranian boats were attacked by the American forces. So according to American claims that these boats were trying to lay down the mines in the Strait of Hormuz, and as a result they got engaged, and then the event has happened. So Iranians are not denying that part. However, they're not confirming and not giving the details of the incident at the end. So this is the second time since the ceasefire was announced on April 28. on. So on May 8th, indeed, the first direct military confrontation has happened between Americans and Iranians. And back then, so the IRGC released a statement. So in the coming hours, we're expecting Iranian officials, politicians, and the security officials to release a statement, an assessment of what has happened. But back then, just as a reminder to our viewers, on May 8th, the IRGC released a statement saying that an American ship, first trying to stop two Iranian ships attempting to pass the Strait of Hormuz. They got engaged with them. They attacked the Iranian ships, and then that American warships attempted to enter the Strait of Hormuz. And then the IRG forces retaliated, got engaged, militarily got engaged, and some of the rockets and the drones were fired at the American warships, and as a result, the American warship was forced to leave the area. So back then, there were no casualties. However, there were an exchange of fire. But here now that the Americans are implying that they might kill some of the IRG officers, so perhaps this is going to be much more serious than the previous one. However, here one thing is quite clear. While the American blockade is still there, Iranians are also not changing their position regarding the Strait of Hormuz. So they're saying that up until the American blockade is there, so Iranians are also going to keep their control over the Strait of Hormuz.